Black is such a happy color. Now, remember, my dear, in all your relationships with boys, you must be shy and modest.
Yes, Mother.
Watch
a hand pull the mail out of a mailbox in a 1965 episode of The Addams Family, and something's off before you even know what you're looking at. That hand is left-handed. Every other time it shows up across the entire series, it's a right hand. Nobody res-hot it. Nobody cut around it. It's been running that way, uncorrected, in reruns for 60 years, and almost nobody who watched it live ever caught it. That's not a mistake somebody missed. It's a joke somebody got away with, and it's just the first thing this cheap, fast, wildly improvised production quietly pulled off while nobody was looking closely enough. Here's what most people never learn about that hand. It wasn't a mechanical prop, and it wasn't a stunt double's arm poking through a hole. It was Ted Cassidy, the same actor who played the towering butler Lurch, lying flat on a rolling trolley hidden under the set, feeding his own arm up through a box on cue. Cassidy was naturally right-handed, and that's the hand thing used almost every time he played the role. But every so often, according to people who worked alongside him, he'd switch to his left just to test whether anyone on set, or in the audience, was actually paying attention. Almost nobody was. The gag stayed hidden for decades until fans with remote controls and a lot of free time started rewinding and freeze-framing old episodes, and the switch became one of those pieces of trivia that circulates among people who've seen the show so many times they've started studying it instead of just watching it. Even the show's own credits played along with the mystery. At the end of every episode, thing was billed simply as itself, never as Ted Cassidy, which meant the joke never had to explain itself to anyone who didn't already know. That kind of loose, improvised energy wasn't limited to one prop hand. It was baked into almost every decision that built the show, starting with the fact that the family didn't even have names when the whole thing began. Charles Addams had been drawing this family for The New Yorker for decades before television ever came calling, and in every one of those original cartoons, nobody in the family had a name. They were just the family, recognizable by silhouette and mood rather than any individual identity. When a network finally decided to build a full series around them, somebody had to sit down and name 5 people almost from scratch, on a deadline, and turn private New Yorker in-jokes into characters a weekly audience could actually follow. The daughter's name came out of an old nursery rhyme called Monday's Child, the one that assigns a personality to every day of the week. Wednesday's Child, the rhyme says, is full of woe, and that line became both a name and a defining trait for the character. Her full name landed as Wednesday Friday Addams, which is its own small joke, since Friday's Child in most versions of that same rhyme is described as loving and giving. The father's name almost went a different direction too. Addams reportedly offered 2 options for the patriarch, Gomez or Rapelli, and left the choice to whichever actor ended up playing him. John Astin picked Gomez, and it's hard now to picture the character under any other name. The son had the roughest path to a name of all. Addams originally wanted to call him Pubert, and the studio said no almost immediately, since that sounded a little too suggestive for family television in the early 1960s. They landed on Pugsley instead, and the rejected name didn't actually disappear for good. It resurfaced decades later as the name of the family's new baby in the 1993 film Addams Family Values, proof that even a joke a network vetoed once can eventually find its way back into the story. Getting the show to sound like something worth watching involved its own kind of shortcut, one built around a composer working with almost no budget. Vic Mizzy wrote the now famous theme around a harpsichord line that gave it an antique, slightly unsettling flavor, and he built the fingersnap percussion into the arrangement from the start, since it cost nothing and needed no extra musicians at all. The lyrics created a bigger problem. The production reportedly didn't want to pay for a group of singers to record the vocal, so Mizzy sang it himself and layered his own voice on top of itself to fake the sound of multiple singers trading lines, a trick most people watching at home could never tell apart from an actual group. The song never became a major chart hit when it was first released as a single. Decades later, it's one of the most recognizable few seconds of music in American television, and it's still instantly identifiable from nothing more than a handful of finger snaps, even to people who've never watched a full episode of the show it came from. The casting behind the camera had its own share of accidents that turned into signature moments. John Astin didn't originally set out to play the family patriarch. He came in to audition for Lurch, the towering, near-silent butler, and the producers decided he wasn't right for that part. What he was right for, as it turned out, was Gomez, and the redirect defined the rest of his career. Astin later said Gomez ended up being the clearest expression of his own personality of anything he ever played. Lurch went instead to Ted Cassidy, a 6'9" former radio announcer whose height had already made him a natural pick for unusual character roles. The part was written to be completely mute, a silent presence who'd answer doors and ring the household gong. During filming, the moment came for Lurch's first entrance, and Cassidy improvised 2 words in his deep, deliberate voice. "You rang?" It got a big enough laugh on set that the producers rewrote the character to let him actually speak, and that ad-libbed line became his signature for the rest of his career. Morticia came together very differently. Carolyn Jones wasn't a struggling actress hoping for any part she could land. She'd already earned an Academy Award nomination for a film called The Bachelor Party and shared the screen with Elvis Presley in King Creole before television ever became a serious option for her. Taking a weekly sitcom role was, on paper, something of a step down for someone with that resume. She was also already a fan of Charles Addams's original cartoons before the show existed, and the two of them reportedly became genuine friends during production. Astin pushed to make the marriage between Gomez and Morticia feel like a real, physical romance rather than the sexless television pairings audiences were used to at the time, and the visible affection between the two characters became one of the show's most talked about qualities among viewers who weren't used to seeing a husband and wife act quite that openly smitten with each other on a family program. The younger cast members came from far less experienced backgrounds. Lisa Loring, cast as Wednesday, had been modeling since she was 3 years old and was 5 when she landed the role, too young to read yet, so she learned her lines by having them read aloud to her and then repeating them back. Cousin ITT, meanwhile, was played by a performer named Felix Silla, who reportedly walked into an open casting call and was handed the role largely because of his size, no elaborate audition required. Running against a rival show almost nobody remembers as a real threat at the time only added to the pressure. The Addams Family and the Munsters premiered within days of each other in September 1964, 2 black-and-white sitcoms about unusual families airing on competing networks in the same week, both built around a similar idea, a family that looked strange on paper but treated each other with real warmth underneath it. Both shows scrambled to look distinct from one another once everyone realized what they were up against, and John Astin argued in later interviews that the concepts weren't actually all that similar, since the Munsters looked like monsters but behaved like an ordinary sitcom family, while the Addamses looked completely normal and behaved like nothing of the sort. Audiences mostly blurred the two shows together anyway. Both series ran for exactly 2 seasons before cancellation, and both ultimately lost their audience to the same rival, the campy new superhero series Batman, which pulled away the exact demographic both spooky sitcoms had been competing for. Behind the scenes, the budget crunch showed up in stranger ways than casting alone. Building a full Gothic mansion from scratch would have cost more than the production could justify, so the studio reused sets and dressing left over from an unrelated MGM film that had recently wrapped. The famously dark, shadowy Addams' living room wasn't actually dark in person at all. It was painted in bright, almost garish colors, chosen specifically because black and white film would render them as convincing shades of gray on screen, a trick that let the crew fake a moody, Gothic look without spending real money on it. Even Gomez's trademark cigar carried a hidden cost of its own. It wasn't just a character quirk. It doubled as paid product placement for an actual cigar brand, worked into the show as a visible prop nearly every episode. Astin had a running bit of stubbing the cigars out directly on his own breast pocket for comic effect, and to keep him from actually catching fire on camera doing it, the wardrobe department lined the inside of his suit jacket with a flame-resistant material that was standard for the era. None of that behind-the-scenes scrappiness compares to the story carried onto the set by one specific cast member, someone whose own childhood had already reshaped American law decades before he ever put on Uncle Fester's costume. Jackie Coogan, who played Fester, had been one of the biggest child stars in the history of American film long before the Addams Family existed. He worked directly with Charlie Chaplin as a small child, co-starring in The Kid in 1921, and by his late teens he'd appeared in nearly 20 films and become one of the most recognizable young performers on the planet, his image printed across dolls, stationery, and merchandise nationwide. He earned millions of dollars as a child. Under California law at the time, none of that money legally belonged to him. It belonged to his parents, which was standard, unquestioned practice across the entire industry back then. His father managed the funds until his death in a car accident in 1935, and his mother and stepfather took over what remained. When Coogan turned 21 and finally asked for his fortune, he discovered most of it was gone. He sued his mother and stepfather in 1938 to try to recover what he believed was rightfully his, and even though he won the case, legal costs and the terms of the settlement meant he walked away with only a fraction of what he'd actually earned as a child, roughly $126,000 out of a much larger sum that had been reported as remaining. At one particularly desperate point during the fight, he reportedly turned to Chaplin for help, and Chaplin gave him cash, without hesitation. Coogan's case became public enough and outrageous enough that California lawmakers acted. The following year, the state passed the California Child Actors Bill, still known informally today as the Coogan Law, requiring that a portion of a child performer's earnings be set aside in a protected trust the parents couldn't simply spend. Versions of that law remain on the books today, still protecting child actors working right now, decades after the case that inspired it. Suing his own family cost Coogan more than money, too. His stepfather had industry connections, and Coogan reportedly struggled to land film roles for years afterward, rebuilding his career largely on stage before television eventually gave him a second act. By the time casting began on The Addams Family, the lawsuit that had once made him a difficult hire had become old history to a new generation of viewers who only knew him as the bald uncle who lit light bulbs in his own mouth for laughs. It's the kind of detail that makes a low-budget, two-season sitcom feel a lot less disposable than its ratings alone would suggest, and it's part of why this particular cast still gets talked about decades after the show ended. Come back to that left hand for a second. Things switching from right to left in the middle of a scene was never treated as an emergency. Nobody scrambled to fix it. Nobody cut around it in the editing room. It simply aired, week after week, and kept airing in reruns for 60 years, sitting in plain view until fans with rewind buttons finally started noticing what had been there the whole time. That's really the story of this entire production in miniature. A recycled set painted the wrong colors on purpose. A theme song one man faked into sounding like three people. A butler who wasn't supposed to talk until an actor couldn't help himself. A cast pulled together from Oscar-nominated actresses, 5-year-olds who couldn't read yet, and one genuinely serious piece of Hollywood legal history that nobody expected to walk through the door. None of it was engineered to be flawless. Somehow, almost all of it worked anyway, and the leftover mistakes, like one crooked hand caught on camera in 1965, ended up being some of the most memorable parts of the whole show. Now that you know Thing was switching hands on purpose, what other detail do you think slipped past everyone for 60 years? Let us know in the comments. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this, go ahead and subscribe for more stories like this one.